Welcome to Stormwater Awareness Week, to the Post-Construction Maintenance Inspection Procedures Workshop. We have Colleen Hunt from Stone Creek Consulting presenting for us today. She also presented for us yesterday, so if you didn't attend that workshop or you did get a chance to, it is posted on stormwaterawareness.org for your review as well. All right, it is 11 o'clock. Once again, for those of you who are just now joining us, welcome to Stormwater Awareness Week and welcome to the Post-Construction Maintenance Inspection Procedures 101 workshop. Sorry, not 101. That was the last one. And then welcome to Colleen Hunt. She'll be presenting for us today from Stone Creek Consulting. Colleen, if you'd like to introduce yourself, we can go ahead and get started.
Great, thank you so much. So my name is Colleen Hunt, Stone Creek Environmental Consulting. I have been working in water quality regulations for 25 years. I was a state regulator in the state of California for a majority of my career, and I've been doing consulting for the past 7 years. I'm located in Windsor, California, which is about 60 miles north of San Francisco. And I have a real passion for post-construction and LID. And I work really hard with my clients and the general community to educate them on the importance of these features, as well as their water quality benefit. And so I'm really excited to be here to be able to provide this workshop. It's only an hour, and we could probably talk about these types of inspections for days on end, honestly, just because there are different types of BMPs, and there's just so much to talk about when it comes to post-construction. So this is, I've got good information. I hope that you find this useful. I don't think that I can tell the whole story in an hour, but we'll see how useful this is for you. And hopefully you have some takeaways, whether you're a new inspector or a seasoned veteran with lots of experience. So the maintenance inspection objectives for post-construction BMPs is really looking at, are we maintaining the BMP's functionality? And really the BMPs are put into place to either treat stormwater, retain stormwater, some do both. And so we ultimately, that is our ultimate goal with these inspections, is to make sure that the maintenance is being done so that these BMPs can do their job and have their full potential for water quality benefits. If you're in the municipal stormwater program, whether if you are, you likely have a permit from a regulatory body. And low impact development in particular is a compliance framework for total maximum daily loads, or TMDLs. They're going to help achieve receiving water limitations that you may have in your permits, and just generally meeting that maximum extent practicable definition that is required in all MPDES municipal stormwater permits. So these BMPs, sometimes it feels like it's just a regulatory hurdle and boxes we check to comply with one regulation or another, but they really do serve a water quality benefit. And if we can keep them maintained and functional, we can see some results, especially in the long term. I'm going to go through a few quick terms and definitions just to make sure we're all oriented on the same page, with a few of the terminology that I'm going to use during the training. So the training is post-construction maintenance inspections, which has a broad definition. Post-construction is a broad definition. And really, I have the formal definition on the screen, which you can read, but really what it comes down to is post-construction or any BMPs that are on a project after the project construction has been completed, that those BMPs serve some purpose to reduce pollutants and stormwater runoff. That's really what we're talking about. And so broadly speaking, that can be low impact development. And I know in the state of California, um, most municipal stormwater, in fact, all municipal stormwater programs, post-construction really is the emphasis on LID. There are some other components, such as, you may have certain projects that need an oil water separator, for example. And so that would be considered post-construction as well. And so just like to highlight that the broader term of post-construction versus LID, which I think is how, at least in California, we are complying with post-construction requirements. And so low impact development, or LID, are these features that are designed to try and maintain your pre-development hydrology. And there's the requirements around post-construction in terms of capturing a certain volume of water or treating a certain amount of water during a certain storm event. That's going to vary widely, especially with an audience like today, where we have people potentially from all over the country, maybe even internationally. So those requirements are going to vary in terms of the pre-development hydrology that needs to be incorporated into the design. But we use this generally with small scale landscape-based features, and they are designed to capture, treat, infiltrate, filter, store, evaporate, or retain, right? So LID, there's some functionality of treatment and or retention. There's a variety of low impact development. I think the most common in in the state of California, what is strived for is meeting the retention and treatment requirements with using bioretention. And so I generally tend to focus on bioretention during trainings, which is what we'll look at today. Certainly maintenance inspections, their purpose is going to be the same regardless of the type of LID feature you might be inspecting, but we'll focus on bioretention today. Like I said, if this class was more than an hour, we maybe would be able to touch into some different features or specifics for different types of low impact development BMPs. But since bioretention is kind of the most standard, that's what we'll focus on. Just a few acronyms: MS4, Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. So this is referring to a municipality that has storm drain infrastructure not linked to a wastewater treatment plant. I know in California, that's pretty old methodology of piping your stormwater. City of San Francisco still has a combined system, not very common in California. And so we refer to these as MS4s from the acronym. And I think one of the important features is if your system is not combined, that your storm drain infrastructure is separate, it doesn't go to a treatment plant, it is being discharged directly to a river or creek or some type of receiving water body, usually with no treatment. There might be some BMPs in place like LID, but generally, the system's built in such a way that there's no end of pipe treatment. BMP, best management practice, pretty common terminology for stormwater managers. And so just want to define the acronym, make sure we're all on the same page with that. And then I do want to just quickly define bioretention, that it really, the standards that are developed for bioretention have, it's a BMP to retain stormwater runoff using vegetated depressions in soils. broad definition, but there usually is a retention component, not always. Sometimes there's treatment and well, if depending on the soils and things like that. But that's opposed to bioretreatment and biofiltration, where you have like a tree well, as in the picture. The water comes in, it absorbs through the media, which is acts as some type of filter, but then the water is discharged. So there's no retention here. And so I like to kind of distinguish between bioretention, biotreatment, and biofiltration. Bioswale, which can be a form of bioretention, but we tend to refer to these areas as a more, if your BMP follows more of a linear path. And also, has that treatment and or retention characteristics. Okay, so focusing now on LID maintenance. So we have, most permits have requirements for what needs to happen once these BMPs are installed. And I'm basing this off of the permits I'm most familiar with, which do include having some type of maintenance declaration with the responsible party that will have to take responsibility for maintaining these BMPs. So we have public BMPs, which maybe a city is going to take responsibility for. And then we have private BMPs. So BMPs on private property where they are conditioned through these maintenance declarations, which are tied to the deed of the property, to conduct routine maintenance to keep BMPs functional. And so within those requirements, we usually are required to track where these BMPs are located. And so having an inventory, and then inspections. So permits usually will specify frequency. I work with some permits that actually say, like, you have to develop a checklist and have procedures that are readily available to inspectors. And you have to have legal authority in your for enforcement procedures. So if you have a stormwater quality ordinance of some type, that you do have the legal authority that if the BMPs are found to not be maintained, are destroyed, they need to be fully replaced or revegetated, or whatever the issue may be, that municipality has the authority to enforce on those types of violations. And then we often see reporting requirements. And so a lot of times when you're required to do an inspection or take some type of action under your permit, it's really important to document somehow that you've completed those actions. And if you're ever inspected or audited by your regulator and they ask to see your inspection reports for LID maintenance or post-construction maintenance, and you don't have them, even if you've done the inspections, if you don't have that documentation, that could be considered non-compliant. So important, if your permit requires the reporting, important to get that done. And I'll just make one mention here that some permits in the state of California have a self-certification program where they allow the owners of the BMPs to certify that the BMPs are being maintained. And usually there's some minimum inspection requirement, like maybe the municipality is going out once every 5 years. I've seen some permits, and I think that we're seeing renewal permits evolve past this, where there's only the self-certification program. So you may not necessarily be required to inspect these BMPs. Likely, if you're here in this training, you have some interest or requirement to do so. But I just thought I'd mention, it's not a universal requirement to do these inspections. So let's talk about inventory. I actually see this as one of the more important elements of the post-construction program. I have seen a lot of municipalities struggle with keeping their LID BMP inventory current. And I think what ends up happening, there's a lot of different scenarios in why these inventories aren't well kept. But, basically you have a stormwater program manager, maybe it's the person who's in charge of permit compliance for a municipality. They are tracking this in an Excel spreadsheet, and then they decide to take another job somewhere else. And maybe it's not even with the same municipality, they have just moved to the other side of the country or have gone somewhere else. Whatever the case may be, what I tend to see is under those circumstances, then you go in and say, okay, well, where are your BMPs? What BMPs are you going to inspect? And everyone's kind of just going off a memory of where these BMPs have been installed. And that really never ends well. Like, you really do have to have a good tracking method for these BMPs. And if it's an Excel spreadsheet, I'm not knocking that. I'm just saying it's hard for that to live beyond the person who created it, especially if it's just saved on their computer. If it's in a shared drive and multiple people have access to it, that might work really well. There's lots of different softwares out there that have tracking systems. And so this is a screenshot of one that I use. It's called To Inform by Second Nature. And there's a spatial representative. So every marker on this map represents a BMP. And then we also have a list. And so I can, manage the inventory also, spatially and through this list. So whatever method you use, whether it's a software system, GIS, Excel spreadsheet, make sure you have procedures to not only memorialize which projects have BMPs that are going to need maintenance inspections, but some indication of what needs to be inspected. So it's the other issue I come across is we may have a good list like this one I'm showing you, but if you're not tracking the BMP on some type of spatially represented like GIS or mapping system, I even used Google Earth for tracking these locations. It's really hard to send an inspector out to a project and say, go inspect these BMPs if they don't have a map that shows where they're located, especially because not always, not our classic LID is not going to be subsurface, but like I showed you that tree well, if you send out an inspector who doesn't know that tree well provides stormwater treatment from the surface, you can't tell. So it's really important not only to have the projects, but the BMP types and locations. And I will say this has been a real struggle for some of the clients I work with, because there's, we do a plan review and it gets approved, and then that goes on one person's desk and it gets filed away, and there's a breakdown in communication with the person who's tracking these BMPs. So, it's really hard to maintain an inspection program if you don't have a really good mechanism for communicating within departments in terms of where these BMPs are located. Okay, so then it's inspection checklists, also really important to have a focus for when you get out into the field to document your observations. So through the To Inform software that I use, there is an inspection checklist embedded into each BMP. And so we can go out in the field, we can take a tablet, we can locate the BMP in the software, we can click into the inspection module, conduct our inspection digitally right into the system, and then it saves our observations. We can also take pictures and upload them right into the system. And again, you don't need to have a software to do these inspections, but it would be great to have, you do need to have some type of inspection form. And I have one client, I created a Microsoft Office form. So same idea, it's digital. You give the link to the inspector and they fill this form out for every BMP they visit. It gets memorialized in Microsoft Office forms. Can then go into Microsoft Forms and download an Excel spreadsheet, and then you get all your data in one spot for that round of inspections. So there are different ways, or, a hard copy paper. I do have an inspector that works for me that he's old school. He likes to print the paper and write it all out, and that works too. So when we go into inspect, really, I look at these now this is for bioretention, remember. We're looking at kind of the BMP from three components. We look at where the water goes in, which I'm going to refer to those as inlets, and where the water goes out. I'm going to refer to that as an outlet, although it looks like a normal inlet usually. So just want to make sure inlets and outlets relative to the BMP. And then we look at the BMP as a whole. And I'm going to show you lots of pictures and examples and walk you through what to look for in these three areas. So for inlets and outlets, you want to look at, can you find them? Are they accessible? Is there active erosion in the area of an inlet or an outlet? Is there debris and clogging? Is there structural damage? And really, the debris and clogging is very common, especially if you just happen to be there the day before a landscape professional is going to be out doing routine maintenance, right? The clogging of these during the winter can be pretty frequent. And so making sure, we're looking at these to make sure it's cleared out, on a regular basis. So like I said, I'm going to show a lot of pictures from here on out in the presentation, just giving examples of, things that look good, things that maybe don't look so good, just what to look for when you're out in the field. So here's an inlet to a BMP, pretty clear. Someone was probably just out here and cleared out any debris that had been collected at this location. So this is a BMP. Let's see. I gotta get there we go. All right. So this is a BMP, and this actually collects sheet flow from this parking lot. And so it doesn't have that in like the specific point of an inlet. It's more, it's basically the whole length of this area. I do have concerns here that this is just bare dirt, and over time you're probably going to get a lot of erosion, and this should maybe be rocked or a little more vegetated. But what I really wanted to show in this picture was the inlets can be, like I showed before, a curb cut or more of these sheet flow. So a curb cut that's not been cleared out. And what I actually like about this picture is it does demonstrate how effective these BMPs are at collecting debris. And, under normal, or I should say, old circumstances with no BMPs, this is potentially debris that would end up in the storm drain and ultimately to our receiving waters. So this does capture the value of these BMPs. However, they do need to remain cleaned out so that water can get in. Eventually, if this is too far clogged, it's going to stop collecting the pollutant, and it's also not going to get the water into the BMP. So here we have a curb cut. Interesting for it to be along a structure. Although, we don't, I'm just going to point that out. I'm not going to really discuss design of BMPs, but you could see here this inlet has been utilized for storage of materials, which we don't want. We want to keep these clear. And so, this is an observation in an inspection that we would want to note, that we have to clear out the debris and to not use these features as general storage. I would give this BMP like an A+. It looks really good. And, we're going to talk about the vegetation in a minute, but it also has great the vegetation is really healthy. And this curb and the inlet is cleared out. So that looks great. All right, let's talk about outlets. So if you happen to took my training yesterday, I talked about the high flow bypass and the problems with a high flow bypass being at the lowest elevation of the BMP. And that if you don't have some type of clearance that allows the top of the inlet to be at a higher elevation, you're not going to get the pooling that you need if you have a retention requirement. You may not get the treatment that's needed because water is going to make a direct line to the lowest point in your BMP. And so if that's the inlet, you may not have a functional BMP. But you also are going to get a BMP that is likely going to be clogged and needing a lot of maintenance. So, ideally, this isn't a great design, but with that, that's what was installed. And you can see it's subject to needing to be cleared out frequently because of its configuration. Here's another outlet. Really healthy, there's pretty healthy vegetation here, but it's almost completely covering our outlet. And so we would want to see that mowed and trimmed to open up that space, make sure that that's clear and free of any debris or planting. This was a really odd inspection that I did. And honestly, this becomes more of an install issue. The project, according to the map, there was supposed to be an outlet here, and this was actually more of like a board. And I couldn't tell if this was a cover, and it was heavy, and it seemed very kind of cemented into the BMP. So I personally could not really figure out what this was and if it could be moved, if it was meant to be temporary. But, nevertheless, whatever it is would be preventing the outflow from functioning properly. So we sent a maintenance request letter to this property owner asking them, to remove these and, to make sure that these would be functional during the rainy months. So there is actually an outlet here. It took me a minute to find it. I did have a map, and I just kind of looked for the low point in the BMP, and this outlet was completely covered in sediment and debris and bark and just everything. So, um, you know, it's unfortunate, I think during early LID and bioretention installations, it was just very common to put the outlet at such a low elevation. And so, that's the real issue. But since, like I said before, since that's how it was actually installed, we need to address it. And so this just really needs frequent attention. Um, and so that's the inlets and outlets. Now we're going to talk about maybe kind of looking at the BMP more as a whole and its functionality and the maintenance. And so there's several aspects to keeping a BMP, bioretention BMP, functional. You have the filter bed maintenance. You have the medallion labels if you are in fact keeping these labeled somehow as BMPs for education and outreach. Sediment and debris removal. So instead of at the inlet or the outlet, has the BMP collected a lot of leaf litter, and that needs to be moved. So not just where the water is entering, but in the BMP as a whole. Is the BMP stable? Is the vegetation in need of mowing and trimming? Tree branch pruning, just the general, maintenance of the vegetation, and then trench drain cleaning. So again, I'm just going to show a bunch of pictures. I'm going to show things that look good and things that need to have some maintenance procedure or some maintenance conducted. So this BMP, we have really lush vegetation. And another thing, if you're dealing with a bioretention standard that requires 50% or 51% usually of vegetation coverage, that's another thing you want to look at. And I'll show you some pictures on that in a bit. But, when you look at this and there's just all this lush vegetation, this is a really healthy BMP. As is this one, the vegetation is, it's very lush and it's going to be really functional and it looks really good. There may be some debris that needs to be cleared out, pretty minor in this picture, but in terms of the health of the vegetation, it's an important thing to look at. So we'll look at a few more vegetation. So this is a bioretention unit. Not looking so good. It was over 2 years old when I inspected it. So just really there's the initial establishment of plants, and sometimes that requires extra watering. Sometimes just not enough plants are put in to the BMP. Sometimes the landscaping, they'll they'll cut everything back, and that maybe isn't the best maintenance practice for some of these BMPs. So there's a variety of reasons that the vegetation might look sparse, but this would be a BMP that I would make note of. Because of its age, we would want to see that 51% coverage by now. So maybe we need some improvements here to be meeting the standards. This BMP had no vegetation, so you do have to make sure you have the authority and the mechanism to be able to go to these projects and say, all the vegetation died or was maybe never put in the first place. I don't know specifically for this BMP, but it needs to be rectified. And then just the, dying vegetation. This BMP is located in a area that has a very, very hot summers. And while our BMPs do require drought tolerant plants and that the plants should be able to live through whatever conditions, they should be selected to live through the conditions of where they're going to be planted. It just, this particular BMP really struggled with getting any established vegetation. I will say as a side note, that outlet, you can see it's above, that there's the ability for water to pool there, and then the larger storms will overflow into that outlet. So it's a good outlet, and we are able to see that really well. But the picture here is really about, there's a huge issue here with the vegetation that needs to be corrected. And just more of the same, and I think the reason I put all these pictures in is because it's very common. And I think what happens is the vegetation doesn't get established in the first place because of the extra care and watering that some of these plants need to thrive. And so we end up with BMPs with no vegetation, problematic. I'll show a few pictures on debris. I went to a project, and so it was a 2-year-old project, and all of the temporary BMPs from the construction of the project were left behind. So this is the remnants of a straw wattle. And so, just looking at debris in general, this just happened to be a temporary BMP that didn't get removed, but we want to make sure that these BMPs are free of debris, including trash. See trash a lot, depending, especially in, areas where maybe the project has a lot of foot traffic. This is at a pretty big, I'll say a box store. And so a lot of traffic, a lot of footprint, and we do see a lot of trash. And that does need to be cleared out as part of keeping the BMPs functional. Invasive weeds. Oh, this one, I don't know. Wait, if you can see, this wasn't my invasive weeds. This is someone's pet waste here. And this looks like it's being dumped here, but also, you never know what you're going to find in these structures. And so making sure that's obviously now a potential bacteria issue as well. And it's also just unsightly and not very kind for the neighbors, but cleaning out debris. And then this project, they have a lot of beautiful trees, which bring in a lot of leaf litter. And so the bioswale is here down the center of their parking lot, and it was just inundated with leaves. So keeping that cleared out to keep our BMPs functional. Mowing and trimming, we do need to keep these plants, tidy, and from overgrowth. This is always a tricky area because I don't want to tell the landscaper that these need to be trimmed and then they go through and mow it all down to like inches. I'm like, we do want the lush vegetation and the growth, but we don't want it overgrown. So using education and outreach to get the vegetation to be mowed and trimmed accordingly, right? And so we can maintain that vegetation and not just mow it down to the surface. This is my invasive vegetation slide. So, weeds and other unwanted vegetation, making sure that part of the maintenance procedures is clearing that out. I also talked about erosion of the feature. So this is water coming in through this tiny inlet, and there's no dissipator. So a lot of times we see at the entry some type of riprap or rock or gravel or something, so that when the water comes in at higher velocities, it doesn't blow out the soil. Also not heavily, the vegetation is also an issue here. There's also invasive vegetation that needs to be removed, other issues, but wanted to just show this picture that we really need something in here to prevent this from getting eroded. Okay, reporting. As I mentioned, it's important to have some type of reporting to document that you've done these inspections. And so, like I said, whether you're using a software, Microsoft Forms, a hard copy, you've taken photographs, just putting some reporting together that memorializes that the inspections have taken place and what the findings were. You also want to follow up on corrective actions with the responsible parties. I like to do maintenance inspections in August. So in California, right, we don't have rain generally in the summer. And so our rainy season is just around the corner. We generally start thinking about rain in September, and our heavier rains will start next month in October, usually. And so I like to go out in August and do these inspections. And for corrective actions, I ask that the corrective actions take place prior to the first rain event. And that way, hopefully, if the corrective actions are followed, we have well-maintained BMPs ready for our winter months. And then something else I'm going to mention, it's not part of a permit requirement, or at least I hardly see education and outreach on maintenance as a permit requirement. I think that there are some requirements around LID trainings, maybe to the design community or plan reviewers, not so much in terms of those who now own and are responsible for maintaining these BMPs. And what I have found is I issue a corrective action and I say, okay, here's what needs to happen before the rains start at this property. And most people call back and say, I have no idea what you're talking about. And there's really a lack of awareness of these types of requirements and what these BMPs even are, especially at, like I said, there's like, let's just say, not to pick on McDonald's, but let's say there's LID at McDonald's. Well, there's the staff turnover issue at McDonald's just as well as anywhere else that we work. And so you might send a letter to that store manager that says like, hey, you have to have your landscaper maintain these. This is the requirement. And they just, they've worked there for a month. They have no idea what you're talking about. So the screenshot I have here is a guide that was developed here locally to where I live under an education and outreach program called Streets to Creeks. And it's intended to be education and outreach for owners of that are required to maintain these features. There's lots of pictures. It was developed with a more easy to understand language instead of some of the technical language that those of us who are involved in the regulations may use. And I have advised my clients who are part of this program, so Streets to Creeks is part of a regional education and outreach campaign, that you should send this guidance out with really annually. It's just a reminder of remember, here's what you're required to, here's what these are, and here's your obligations, and here's why it's important. And, we really struggle with message delivering and behavior change, and it's a big part of MS4 permits, but we still see it's very hard to engage behavior change. But it's important to at least get the conversation going so that when you do send these letters, hopefully the person on the other end isn't going, I have no idea what this is. I'm going to throw this away and ignore it. And now inspectors have to do follow-up, and it becomes more of a workload issue as you have to try and work with these responsible parties to get their BMPs maintained. So good thing to think about, whether it's a permit requirement or not, if you're looking to have an effective program and to really have a streamlined maintenance inspection follow-up, it's a good idea to find some type of guidance or education and outreach material that you can provide to these property owners. And so if you Google Santa Rosa Streets to Creeks, Santa Rosa, California Streets to Creeks, you should come up with the website. And then this guidance document is in the website. You can take a look at it there. Okay, so, we've looked at different elements of LAD, or really, I should say bioretention, maintenance inspections. And it really is a critical part of having properly functioning BMPs to benefit water quality. We talked about the inventory and the importance of that, your inspection procedures. Ultimately, our goal is maintenance occurring so that these BMPs are functional. We talked about record retention, and we talked about education and outreach. And I'll just kind of wrap up also by reiterating, there's a lot more to say on this topic. And so, this was my best attempt to give you the information in the time I allowed. And so I'm happy to take any questions or if anyone, we have 15 minutes. So if anyone wants to also provide any of their experiences or want to talk about these inspections, feel free.
There is a question from Bill here. Is poor design a reportable condition? I believe it was in regard to either the BMPs or the inlets and outlets.
Okay. Yeah. So that's a really good question. It's also a very difficult answer. So most programs have there's also requirements to inspect BMPs when they're being installed. And that's really where the poor design honestly should be caught in the plan review, right? And so the further along you get into the project, the more difficult the conversation becomes to make changes. To answer your question directly, like, yes, if you show up like I'll use the example of the BMP where I couldn't find the outlet because it was buried in sediment and debris. That was poor design. And that's honestly a violation of the municipality's stormwater permit because it didn't get designed according to the standards. So it's actually a huge issue. The problem is going to a project that's 2 years old and finding this. It's like, how did we get here? What happened during the install inspection? What happened during the design review? How did this skip over so many steps to be at a point where you have this poor design that actually got installed and has been part of this project for the past 2 years? So the question I think you have to look at is the municipality willing to require corrective action of the install, right? Because it's really problematic to try and fix a poor design after the project is completed. So I think really what we want to do is make sure we're catching this in the design and the installation. But the authority remains if the if the municipality um, is, really, I can't say they should or shouldn't address it as a corrective action because it's a difficult thing to do, but they have to consider, is there value in correcting this at this point in the project? I will say, if you took the training from me yesterday, I showed a BMP that was created without a curb cut, right? So that is, whether that was poor design or an oversight in the installation, that is something that the municipality did require correction of. So I hope that answers your question. I kind of spoke a lot to a yes or no question, but I don't think it's as simple as yes or no.
Thank you. There's another question here from Heather. Are you able to share any lessons learned from owners not willing or able to address issues found during the inspection process or tips and tricks for enforcement?
Yeah, so that's a difficult one. I think for general maintenance, we generally get good response after people have an understanding of what it is you're asking for. And because usually it's let's say for commercial businesses at least, it's a issue of whoever is doing your landscaping at the property, please inform them that these are corrective actions that are needed and need to take place routinely moving forward. So we've had pretty good luck with those conversations. And so in terms of those not willing, I think just generally speaking, whether it's an illicit discharge or LID maintenance or whatever, stormwater situation that needs to be rectified with the more difficult people, is most municipalities take a progressive enforcement, and they have an ordinance that allows them to, where we generally try and work nice. Hey, this needs to be fixed. If you can do this in 30 days, that would be great. Maybe you give them a second notice to get them moving. And if they just really dig their heels in or create a controversy or are non-responsive, then there's elevated enforcement that happens that can include fines, or having to go before the city council, which nobody wants to do. So, there should be those enforcement mechanisms as part of the enforcement mechanism as part of the ordinance. So I guess, the tips and tricks for enforcement is having a progressive enforcement policy where you can exercise elevated enforcement for those more difficult landowners. Whereas I think the ones, giving them the opportunity to fix something with just a friendly, like, hey, this is really important. Here's some education and outreach on this. There is that maintenance declaration that we're going to hold you to, but can you deal with this and fix this in a kind of cooperative manner?
Okay. And then I have another one here. Do you have any tips and tricks for HOAs that have dissolved?
Ooh, so that's an interesting question. I have not had to deal with that personally. I do know that maintenance declaration, like, that has to be connected to some title deed. So and I don't know how that works with an HOA. So I'm sorry, I don't have any good response to that. I don't know if anyone else on the line might want to jump in on that.
Okay. While we're waiting to see if anybody has anything for that, just personal experience, here's another one for you. How do you handle businesses that are temporarily sold and haven't had an owner on site in years?
Yeah, at least in California, they're going to go to the property owner. And so even if there's a business, like a building that a property manager leases to, and it's been vacant. They're going to look at the property owner to keep those BMPs maintained.
Okay, and then I have another one here for you from Faison. Um, can you share experience with self-inspection reports submitted to the municipality? Are you aware of challenges with enforcement and follow-up?
Yeah. Um, to be direct and honest, those self-certification um, programs they're not effective. Um, so I do work with some municipalities that implement self-certification. So what they do is every year they send out a letter and they say you have to send back, and they'll include what has to get sent back, a certification that you're maintaining these BMPs, and they don't get sent back. And so now the client is stuck in this, endless requesting that these certification, uh, that the maintenance certifications be submitted. And then I've worked with municipalities who do have the self-certification programs, but then they also have to do an inspection once in a while. And I'll go out and do the inspection. It's like, even if they're certifying that the BMPs are being maintained, they're not. And it's not always negligence, right? It's like I said, it depends on my timing as an inspector when I go out there. If the landscaper hasn't been out there yet, or they're due out to come tomorrow, I might find, more minor issues. But when I do these inspections, there's almost always something that needs maintenance. And then you go to like the project where the outlet was completely covered in debris. That was a thick pile of debris. That outlet hadn't seen the light of day for quite a while. And so I think that there's I might have lost my train of thought. But yeah, sorry.
All right. I'm not seeing any more questions.
Oh, I
So
see someone asked what the last question was that no one could help with. That's if a HOA dissolves. And so there's BMPs that need to, like, common area BMPs that an HOA is responsible for. The HOA dissolves. What happens? That was what we were looking for help with.
it doesn't look like anybody had some information for that one, unfortunately.
Yeah, it looks like Zach does.
No, he said he could not.
Oh, I can't help. Okay,
Yeah,
sorry.
it's okay. All right. So thank you, Colleen, for a really great presentation.
There is
Well,
one person with their hand up since we have 2 minutes.
Cecilia, if you'd like
Hi.
to chime in.
Sure. Hi. Um, in my jurisdiction, we have and in my experiences through the years, we've had that happen a couple of times where the HOA dissolves. Um, and it's a tough situation because if your maintenance agreement isn't written to incorporate and list each parcel, then there's room for questioning and challenging by the owners as to what their exact role and responsibility is, and if you can actually motivate them to perform that maintenance. So first, you have to look at the maintenance agreement and see if it somehow incorporates all of the parcels within that HOA development. How strong is that language? And then after that, then we um, have attempt to send out letters to the HO or to all of the parcel owners as a whole, to reach out to them to notify them of this responsibility that is on them now that the HOA is gone.
Well, thank you for um, in, speaking to your experiences. It's not something I've come across. So yeah, thanks.
All right, so we have officially run out of time for this hour. So thank you again, Colleen, for a great presentation. I know I certainly learned a lot for sure. So thank you everybody else for coming out to Stormwater Awareness Week. We still have a few workshops today. Notably at 2 o'clock, site stabilization, final coverage, notice of termination at 2 o'clock, and then at 3 o'clock, Caltrans and the 2022 CGP specification changes. So if you haven't already registered, go ahead and check those out. If you missed any part of this workshop today or you want to view it later, a recorded version will be available within the next 24 to 48 hours at stormwaterawareness.org. All right, so thank you again, Colleen, and thank you everybody for joining us.